The dust settled on the horizon like a veil being drawn across the dying day, and Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of the creek, with her hands submerged in water, so cold it made her bones ache. She didn't mind the pain. It was the only thing that felt real anymore, the only sensation that cut through the numbness, that had wrapped itself around her heart like iron chains. Behind her, the small homestead she'd shared with Daniel for 3 years sat silent and empty, a monument to dreams that would never come to pass. She scrubbed at the cloves mechanically, her movements practiced and precise, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. It was back in that bedroom 2 months ago, listening to Doc Henderson's quiet words as he packed his instruments away. There would be no children. Not now, not ever. The fever that had nearly taken her life last winter had stolen something else instead. Something she hadn't known could be taken until it was gone. Daniel had held her hand and told her it didn't matter, that they had each other, and wasn't that enough? But she'd seen the flicker of disappointment in his eyes before he'd hidden it away, seen the way his gaze lingered on families in town, on fathers teaching their sons to ride, on mothers cradling babies against their chests. The sound of hoofbeats pulled her from her thoughts. She looked up to see a rider approaching from the east, silhouetted against the amber sky. As he drew closer, she recognized the figure of Thomas Brennan, their nearest neighbor, though his ranch was still a good 5 miles south. He rode with the easy confidence of a man born to the saddle. But there was something different about him today, something heavy in the set of his shoulders. He dismounted before reaching her, leading his horse the last few yards. His hat shadowed his face, but she could see the exhaustion etched into every line of his features. Thomas was 42, a decade older than Daniel, and the years showed in the silver threading through his dark hair and the deep creases around his eyes. He'd been their friend since they'd settled here, helping Daniel build their barn, showing them which creek beds ran dry in summer and which held water year-round. "Sarah," he said, his voice rough. "Is Daniel around?" She shook her head. He rode out to check the fence line. "Won't be back until dark." She straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. "What's wrong, Thomas? You look like you've seen a ghost." He removed his hat, turning it in his hands. It was a gesture she'd seen men make 1,000 times when they bore bad news. Her heart clenched. "It's Margaret," he said finally. "She passed this morning, just before dawn." The words hung in the air between them like a physical thing. Sarah felt her knees go weak. She'd known Margaret Brennan was ill. The whole valley knew. But everyone had thought she'd pull through, the way she always had. Margaret was strong, vital. The kind of woman who could birth a calf and make dinner and still have energy to play with her children before bedtime. "Oh, Thomas," Sarah whispered. She moved toward him, not knowing what else to do, and he stood there frozen, his hat crushed between his hands. "I'm so sorry. How are the children?" "They don't understand," he said, and his voice cracked. "James keeps asking when Mama's going to wake up. Rebecca won't stop crying, and little Emma just sits there, staring at nothing. She's only 3, Sarah. She won't even remember her mother." Sarah felt tears burning in her eyes. She'd held baby Emma at her christening, had watched Margaret nurse her with that serene smile mothers wore when everything in the world felt right. "What can I do?" she asked. "I can bring food, I can help with the children, anything." Thomas looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw desperation in his eyes that made her breath catch. "I can't do this alone," he said. "I'm a rancher, Sarah. I know cattle and horses and how to fix a broken fence, but I don't know the first thing about raising 3 children on my own. James is 7, Rebecca's 5, and Emma." His voice trailed off. "How do I explain to them that their mother's never coming back? How do I braid Rebecca's hair or teach Emma her letters or comfort them when they wake up crying in the night?" She didn't have an answer. How could she? She stood there in the fading light, this man's grief washing over her like a wave, and felt the weight of her own inadequacy pressing down on her chest. "You'll learn," she said softly. "You'll figure it out because you have to. Because they need you." He nodded, but she could see he didn't believe it. I buried her on the hill overlooking the north pasture, he said. She always loved that spot. Said it was the most beautiful place in the whole territory. He put his hat back on, preparing to leave. Tell Daniel I'm sorry I missed him. And Sarah, thank you for listening. She watched him ride away, his figure growing smaller against the darkening sky, and something inside her chest twisted painfully. That night, when Daniel came home, she told him about Margaret. He sat at their table with his head in his hands, and she knew he was thinking about Thomas, about those 3 motherless children, about how quickly everything could change. She made dinner, but neither of them ate much. The silence in their small cabin felt suffocating. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah visited the Brennan ranch every day. She brought food, helped clean, tried to bring some order to the chaos that had descended on the household. The children clung to her with desperate need. And every time little Emma wrapped her arms around Sarah's neck, it felt like a knife twisting in her heart. She read them stories and made them meals, and held them when they cried, and each evening when she returned home, she felt like she was leaving a piece of herself behind. Daniel watched her pour herself into helping the Brennans, and she could see the concern in his eyes. One night, as she was washing dishes, he came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "You're running yourself ragged," he said gently. "Thomas is grateful, we all are, but you can't save them all by yourself." "I'm not trying to save them," she said, but her voice was hollow. "I'm just trying to help. Sarah, we need to talk about this." He turned her to face him. "I know how hard this is for you, seeing those children, knowing that we can't have our own. But you're torturing yourself." She pulled away from him, anger flaring hot and sudden in her chest. "Don't," she said sharply. "Don't tell me how I'm supposed to feel." "I'm not," he said, his voice rising to match hers. "I'm just saying that you can't keep doing this to yourself. Every day you come home looking more broken than the day before. Those children need someone," she shot back. "Their mother is dead, Daniel. Dead. And their father doesn't know how to take care of them properly." "That's not your responsibility." "Then whose is it?" The words came out as a shout, and she saw him flinch. The anger drained out of her as quickly as it had come, leaving only exhaustion in its wake. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I need to do this. Please understand." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the hurt in his eyes. "I'm trying," he said finally. "But you're shutting me out, Sarah. You're so focused on those kids that you've forgotten we're supposed to be in this together." She wanted to tell him he was wrong, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she turned back to the dishes, and after a moment, she heard him walk away. That night, they slept on opposite sides of the bed, a chasm of unspoken words between them. 3 weeks after Margaret's death, Sarah arrived at the Brennan ranch to find Thomas, sitting on the porch steps with his head in his hands. The children were inside with Mrs. Patterson, an elderly widow who lived in town and had agreed to help out for a few days. Sarah sat down beside him, not speaking, just being present in the way she'd learned over the years of frontier life. "I can't do this," Thomas said finally. His voice was raw. "I thought I could, but I can't. Every day is harder than the last. James is getting into fights at school. Rebecca won't eat, and Emma screams every time I try to put her to bed. They need their mother, and I can't be that for them." Sarah felt his words settle into her like stones. "You're their father," she said. "That's what they need. Your love, your presence. It's not enough." He looked at her, and she saw tears glistening in his eyes. "I'm failing them, Sarah. Every single day. I'm failing them, and I don't know what to do anymore." She wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but she'd seen the desperation in those children's eyes. She'd seen how they lit up when she arrived each day, how they clung to her, how Rebecca had started calling her name in her sleep. "What are you saying?" she asked quietly. "I'm saying I need help. Real help. Not just someone to come by for a few hours each day." He turned to face her fully. "Sarah, you're good with them. They love you. And I can see how much you love them too." Her heart started beating faster. "Thomas, I don't understand what you're asking." "I need someone to help me raise them," he said. I need someone who can be here every day, who can give them the kind of care and attention I can't provide on my own. Someone who can be. He hesitated, then pushed forward. Someone who can be what Margaret was to them. The words hit her like a physical blow. She stood up, her legs shaky. Thomas, I'm married. I know that, he said quickly. I'm not asking you to leave Daniel. I'm just asking you to consider. There are arrangements that could be made, practical arrangements. This is a hard land, Sarah, and sometimes people have to make hard choices to survive. She stared at him, trying to process what he was suggesting. You're asking me to leave my husband and come live here, to pretend to be your wife. I'm asking you to help me save my children, he said. And there was such naked desperation in his voice that she had to look away. They're drowning, Sarah. I'm drowning. And you're the only lifeline we have. She shook her head, backing away. I can't. Thomas, I can't do what you're asking. It's not right, it's not proper, and Daniel would never. Daniel wants children too, Thomas said. I've seen it in his eyes every time he looks at families in town. Maybe this could be something for both of you. A chance to be parents, even if it's not in the traditional way. Stop, she said, her voice breaking. Just stop, I need to go. She practically ran to her horse, her hands shaking as she mounted. Behind her she heard Thomas calling her name, but she didn't stop. She rode hard for home, tears streaming down her face, her mind reeling from what he'd suggested. It was madness, it was improper, it was impossible. But that night, lying awake beside Daniel, she couldn't stop thinking about those 3 children. About James with his father's eyes and his mother's stubbornness. About Rebecca with her quiet pain and desperate need for comfort. About little Emma, who was too young to understand why her world had been torn apart. She thought about the empty space inside her where her own children should have been, the ache that never quite went away, no matter how hard she tried to ignore it. Daniel noticed her silence over the next few days. He tried to talk to her, to bridge the distance that had grown between them. But she couldn't find the words to explain what Thomas had asked her. How could she tell her husband that another man had essentially proposed that she become a mother to his children? How could she admit that some part of her, some broken, desperate part, was actually considering it? A week after Thomas's proposal, she found herself at the creek again, the same spot where he'd first told her about Margaret's death. She was washing clothes, but her hands moved without purpose, her mind far away. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Daniel standing there, his face drawn and serious. Thomas came to see me, he said without preamble. He told me what he asked you. Sarah's heart stopped. She stood up, water dripping from her hands. Daniel, I was going to tell you. I just didn't know how. Did you say yes? His voice was carefully neutral, but she could see the fear in his eyes. No, she said quickly. No, of course not. I told him it was impossible. But you thought about it. It wasn't a question. She couldn't lie to him. Yes, she whispered. I thought about it. Those children, Daniel, they need so much, and Her voice broke. I can't give you children. I can't give us the family we dreamed about. But maybe I could give them a mother. Maybe I could be something more than just a barren woman living in an empty house. She expected anger. She expected hurt. Instead, Daniel stepped forward and pulled her into his arms. She felt his chest heave with a single, shuddering breath. Sarah, he said, his voice thick, you are not barren. You are not empty. You are my wife, and you are everything I need. But it's not everything you want, she said against his shirt. I see the way you look at fathers with their sons. I see the disappointment you try to hide. He held her tighter. I won't lie and say I don't feel that loss. But losing you would destroy me in a way that not having children never could. He pulled back to look at her face. If you want to help Thomas raise those kids, I won't stop you. But you're not leaving me to do it. We're in this together, remember. For better or worse. She searched his face, looking for resentment or hidden anger, but found only love and determination. What are you saying? I'm saying that if we do this, we do it as a team. Thomas has enough land for 2 families. We could build a cabin nearby, close enough that you could help with the children every day, but far enough that we maintain our own home, our own marriage. It wouldn't be the life we planned, but maybe it could be something good anyway. Sarah felt something crack open inside her chest. You'd do that? You'd uproot our whole life for children that aren't even ours. They could be, Daniel said quietly. Not in the traditional way, but in all the ways that matter. And Sarah, I see how alive you are when you're with them. I see the light come back into your eyes. If this is how we become parents, then maybe that's just how our story is supposed to go. She started crying then, really crying. All the grief and pain and hope she'd been holding back pouring out of her. Daniel held her through it, his hand stroking her hair, whispering soothing words against her temple. When the tears finally subsided, she felt emptied out, but also somehow lighter. I'm scared, she admitted. This isn't how things are supposed to be done. Nothing about life out here is how things are supposed to be done, Daniel said with a small smile. We make our own rules, forge our own paths. That's what frontier life is all about. They talked long into the night, working through the practical details, the logistics, the concerns. The next morning, they rode together to the Brennan Ranch. Thomas was in the barn, and when he saw them both, understanding dawned in his eyes. We have a proposition, Daniel said, his hand firmly clasped in Sarah's. But it's going to be on our terms. They spent hours hammering out the details. Daniel and Thomas would pool their resources, combining their herds and working the land together. Daniel and Sarah would build a cabin on the eastern edge of the Brennan property, close enough for Sarah to help with the children daily, but maintaining their own separate household. Sarah would not be Thomas's wife in any sense. She would be exactly what Thomas had originally asked, a mother figure to his children, nothing more. The arrangement would be practical, respectful, and proper in the eyes of the community. Thomas agreed to everything without hesitation. His relief was palpable, his gratitude overwhelming. But it was the children's reaction that sealed the decision for Sarah. When she sat them down and explained, in simple terms they could understand, that she and Daniel would be living nearby, and that she would be there to help take care of them every day, Rebecca launched herself into Sarah's arms with such force they nearly toppled over. You'll be here when I wake up? Rebecca asked, her voice small and fragile. Every morning, Sarah promised, smoothing the child's tangled hair. James stood apart, his 7-year-old's pride keeping him from showing too much emotion, but she saw the hope dawning in his eyes. Will Mr. Daniel teach me to rope? He asked. Daniel grinned. Every Sunday after church, if your pa says it's all right. Even little Emma seemed to understand that something good was happening. She toddled over to Sarah and placed her tiny hand on Sarah's cheek. Mama, she said tentatively, and Sarah felt her heart shatter and reform all at once. I'm here, sweetheart, Sarah whispered, pulling the little girl into her lap. I'm here. The cabin went up in record time, with help from neighbors who asked surprisingly few questions. People on the frontier understood that survival sometimes required unconventional arrangements, and the general consensus seemed to be that Thomas Brennan's children deserved every chance at a stable life. Within 2 months, Sarah and Daniel had moved into their new home, a sturdy 2-room cabin with a view of both the Brennan house and the mountains beyond. The first few months were an adjustment. Sarah had to learn the rhythms of 3 different children, their needs and fears and small joys. James was stubborn and prone to testing boundaries, still angry at the world for taking his mother. Rebecca was sensitive and clung to Sarah like a shadow, terrified that if she let go, Sarah might disappear too. Emma was easiest in some ways, young enough to adapt quickly, but Sarah felt the weight of being the only mother the child would ever remember. Daniel proved to be a natural with the children. He had patience Sarah didn't possess, especially with James, who needed a firm but gentle male influence. She watched her husband teach the boy to ride, to rope, to mend fence, and saw James slowly start to trust again, to believe that not all good things in life would be ripped away without warning. Thomas kept his distance in appropriate ways, but he proved to be a good partner in this strange arrangement. He deferred to Sarah in matters of the children, but maintained his role as their father, creating a balance that somehow worked despite its unconventional nature. He never remarried, though several widows in town made their interest known. When Sarah asked him about it once, he simply said that he'd had his love, and that was more than some men got in a lifetime. There were hard days. Days when Sarah felt like she was failing everyone. When the children fought and cried and pushed her away, when she questioned whether she had any right to be doing this. Days when she missed the simplicity of her life before, when it was just her and Daniel, and the quiet rhythms of their small homestead. But there were good days too. Days when Rebecca ran to her with a wildflower clutched in her small fist, when James proudly showed her a bird's nest he'd found, when Emma fell asleep in her arms, completely trusting and at peace. 5 years passed. The children grew, and so did Sarah's sense of belonging in this role she'd stumbled into. James, at 12, was nearly as tall as his father and could work a full day on the ranch. Rebecca, 10 now, had become Sarah's shadow, learning to cook and sew and garden. Emma, 8, was a bright, inquisitive child who asked endless questions about everything under the sun. It was Emma who finally voiced what they'd all been dancing around for years. She was sitting at Sarah's kitchen table, carefully forming letters on her slate, when she looked up suddenly and said, "Jenny Anderson says, you're not really my mama because you live in a different house." Sarah's hands stilled on the bread dough she was kneading. "What do you think, Emma?" The girl considered this seriously, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I think Mama is the person who takes care of you and loves you and makes everything better when you're sad. That's you." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "Come here, sweetheart." Emma scrambled off her chair and into Sarah's arms. Sarah held her close, flour from her hands dusting the girl's dark hair. "Your first mama loved you very much," Sarah said softly. "She gave you life and held you and wanted all the best things for you. I could never replace her, and I wouldn't want to. But yes, Emma, I am your mama too, in all the ways that matter." "Can someone have two mamas?" Emma asked. "I think someone as special as you can have as many people loving them as the world can hold." That evening, as Sarah walked back to her cabin, she saw Daniel waiting on the porch. He smiled as she approached, the same smile that had made her fall in love with him 10 years ago. "Good day," he asked. "Emma called me Mama," she said, and her voice caught. Daniel pulled her into his arms. "You are her mama. You're all of their mama. You always have been. I never gave birth to them," she said. "I never felt them move inside me or held them when they took their first breath." "No," Daniel agreed. "But you've been there for 1,000 other firsts. First days of school, first skinned knees, first heartbreaks. You've stayed up all night when they were sick. You've celebrated every small victory. You've wiped away every tear. If that doesn't make you a mother, I don't know what does." She looked up at him. "Do you ever regret it? This strange life we've built?" He considered the question seriously, the way he always did when she asked something important. "I regret that we didn't get to have children the way we planned. I regret that you had to go through the pain of learning you couldn't. But this," he gestured toward the Brennan house, where lamplight glowed warm in the windows. "This strange, beautiful, unconventional family we've created, I don't regret it for a second." A month later, Thomas fell ill. It started as a cough but quickly developed into pneumonia. Doc Henderson did what he could, but they all knew the truth. Thomas was dying. He called Sarah and Daniel to his bedside one night, when the children were asleep. "I need to know they'll be taken care of," he said, his voice weak. "Legally, properly." "Thomas, don't talk like that," Sarah said, gripping his hand. "You're going to pull through this." He smiled faintly. "We both know that's not true." "Sarah, I need you to promise me something. I need you to promise that you'll take them, all 3 of them, and raise them as your own. Not just as their caretaker, but as their mother in every legal sense." "Of course," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Of course we will, Daniel." Thomas looked past her to where Daniel stood. "You have my word," Daniel said firmly. "We'll take care of them. We'll love them. We'll make sure they know who their parents were, both of them." Thomas died 3 days later, on a cold November morning. The children were devastated, having now lost both parents before any of them had reached their teenage years. But they had Sarah and Daniel, and in the end, that made all the difference. The legal process of adoption was complicated, requiring trips to the territorial courthouse and endless paperwork. But 6 months after Thomas's death, it was final. James, Rebecca, and Emma Mitchell became their children in every legal sense. They moved into the main house, the cabin Sarah and Daniel had built becoming a guest house, and slowly, painfully, they began to heal as a family. 10 years later, Sarah stood on the hill overlooking the north pasture, where both Margaret and Thomas were buried side by side. Her hair, now streaked with gray, lifted in the wind. Below, she could see the ranch that had become their home. Daniel was teaching James's oldest son to rope, carrying on the tradition. Rebecca, married now to a good man from town, was visiting with her baby daughter. Emma, grown into a beautiful young woman, was heading off to teacher's college in the fall. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Emma approaching, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers. "I thought we could leave these," Emma said softly. Together, they placed the flowers on the graves. "Do you remember them?" Sarah asked. "Your first parents." "I remember feelings more than specifics," Emma said. "Warm, safety, love. And I remember the day you told me you'd be here every morning. That's when I stopped being scared." Sarah put her arm around Emma's shoulders. "You know, you asked me once if someone could have 2 mamas. I said yes, but I think I was wrong." Emma looked at her, concerned. "I think you've always had just one mama in your heart," Sarah continued. "The woman who gave birth to you will always be a part of you, always be honored and remembered. But the mama you carry with you, the one whose voice you hear when you make decisions, whose values guide you, whose love shaped you into who you are, that's always been me, just like you've always been my daughter, from the moment I first held you." Emma hugged her tight. "I love you, Mama. I love you too, sweetheart. More than I ever thought it was possible to love anyone." They stood there for a while, looking out over the land that had witnessed so much pain and so much healing. In the distance, Sarah could hear James calling his son, could see Rebecca laughing at something Daniel said, could feel the weight of Emma's head resting on her shoulder. This was her family, cobbled together from grief and necessity and love. It wasn't the family she'd imagined, but it was the family she'd been given, and it was more than enough. As they walked back down the hill, Sarah thought about that day by the creek so many years ago, when Thomas had asked the impossible and Daniel had made it possible. She thought about her younger self, crying because she couldn't be a mother in the traditional sense, not knowing that sometimes the most profound kind of motherhood comes not from giving life but from saving it. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Sarah took Emma's hand, and together they walked toward home, toward the family waiting for them, toward the life she'd never planned, but couldn't imagine living without. She'd learned that being a mother had nothing to do with biology, and everything to do with choice, with showing up every day, with loving someone enough to let them become whoever they were meant to be. She'd cried once, believing she couldn't be a mother. But Thomas had seen what she couldn't see in herself, had asked her to be the mother to his children, and in doing so, had given her the greatest gift she'd ever received. She hadn't given birth to James, Rebecca, or Emma, but they were hers in every way that mattered, and she was theirs forever.